Hi everyone, welcome to the Odinic School of Mysteries. My name is Bear. Thank you. I think it's number 20. I think we've made 20 of these. Congratulations. I'm glad you stuck with me the whole time. That's really impressive that you've done that. So, the sound quality today will not be very good. That's because, as you can tell, I've come away from my desk and am now currently hiding in the bedroom with my air conditioner. It's like 1,000 degrees out there, and I apologize that it's not as classy looking, and that the sound's going to be off, and that it's going to shake a little bit, because I have my computer sitting on a couple pillows. So thank you for your love and understanding. All right. So it occurred to me that I haven't talked a lot about a lot of the Norse stuff in a little bit, and which is the primary ethos behind the Odinic School of Mysteries, is the Norse mysteries. So today, I thought it would be really fun to tackle the frost giants. I know, frost giants are kind of cool. So here's the deal. So the thing to think about. All mystery school symbolism is triform in nature. There's three parts to it. There's a physical thing, there's a mental thing, and there's a spiritual thing. And they all are true at once. And each, not to get too confusing, but they're triform in each individual plane. And at some point, I'll go over what a plane is. I can't do it today, so for now, you're just going to have to be confused. I'm sorry, we just don't have the time to go into what a plane is. So I apologize for that. But for now, we'll just say it's just easier to say a symbol means three things. And I don't know, my screen's flickering. I don't know what's going on. I'm sorry. I apologize. I need to get a better camera. What was I going to say? Yeah, the plane. Three things. Physical thing, mental thing, and spiritual thing. So, an esoteric philosophy. So, just a little bit of a brief explainer. Most occult knowledge, or most esoteric mystery school knowledge, is broken up into two pretty major camps. You have the major arcana and the minor arcana. The major arcana is about it's knowledge that consists of the macrocosm, planets and gravitational pulls and the order of the universe and black holes and the cosmos and the creator of all things, and just the immensity of things, the measuring of the immensity of things. The minor arcana, or the minor universe, the minor cosmos, is the arcana that is about the person, your individual, the workings of your individual universe. So things like mentalism and chakras and meditation and the way the mind works and all of that kind of thing, those are all minor arcana. So the three things that a symbol will represent, it'll represent something that's external than you, something you can point to in the physical universe, right? So, and then it has a minor arcana portion and a major arcana portion. So there's kind of three components to it. So we're going to be talking about the frost giants, and I'm going to briefly hit on the first one, and then we're going to move on to the other two, the mental portion and the macro portion of the symbol. So, where to begin? There are two stories that run parallel to each other. Two histories in the universe, at least in our world. You have the official story that's told to you by the establishment group of people, by the universities, by the governments, by the corporations, by the world and the powers that be. There's an official history that's presented to you. And then there's the real history of what actually happens. You know, like, I don't remember who said it, but it's the victor is who makes the history, who tells the story. History is very biased, right? It's very biased. Excuse me. How rude. I apologize. I'm in my bed, so my body thinks it's going to sleep. Don't go to sleep, body. Don't go to sleep. So you have the official version, and then you have the real version. And the real version is much more interesting because we have been here hundreds of thousands, if not millions of years longer. The history of Earth is millions of years in the making. We've been here probably about 8 times as long as modern history thinks we have. We've been here, the human population has been here for a very long time. But we're not and have not been the only people who have rented this apartment, so to speak. The story of Earth is very storied and very long. And there's if you spent any time online, you've probably bumped into some of these contrarians, and I'm among one of the contrarians, I guess you could say, that say this, that the Earth is fantastically old and that we weren't the only people who were here. I'm going to forget a lot of these guys, but there's like John Anthony West, Robert Schoch, Sitchin was another one. Did I say John Hancock? Not John Hancock. Graham Hancock. There's another guy in South Africa. Crap, I can't remember his name now. I can't remember his name. Oh, anyway, he's really cool. There are some of these, they're heavily accredited academic, scholarly people, right? These aren't just some schmo on the internet. These are people who have actual academic credentials who are saying that the Earth is much older and the stories that happen on the Earth are much older. So, for instance, in the U.S., South America, and Africa, and even in China, we've been finding giants in the ground. You never hear about them because usually what happens is a story will be printed about it in a local newspaper, and then the Smithsonian will come, snatch them up, and then they're never seen or heard from again. This has happened a lot. And I'm going to try to put some over here if I can, or I don't know. I'm going to try and put some of these, if I could find them, I'm going to put them up there so you can see some of these news articles that are very old. And yeah, of course, some of them could be fakes, but that's just what we do. We see evidence of this kind of stuff in the architecture and the way people have built stairs and all kinds of things that indicate giants were here. So they're definitely here. And then the poor gentleman, I can't remember his name because he's one of my favorite guys. I can't remember his name. I will of course put his name up here because I want you to know about him. They're starting to think that some of these giant stones in South Africa that everyone took for stones are actually bones. They're just made out of a different mineral composite than we normally think of as bones, so people have always just thought they were rocks. And there's a really good picture of him holding a giant stone heart that is anatomically correct to an actual heart. So I don't really expect you guys to believe this if you don't want to. Right? I have always maintained that I have no expectation of belief on my channel. I don't need you to believe me. It's not necessary. But it's cool, though. It's cool. A lot of these things are kind of known throughout the mystery schools that just don't quite make it out into the population, because the population or either think you're crazy or they're just not interested. So that is the very short externalized portion of the story, where a lot of these myths that we get with Jack the Giant Killer, Thor, Odin, and a lot of these other stories about people who are fighting giants, they come from a time when the gods were here last time. Where the gods were here and the giants were here and they butted heads quite aggressively. And so that is, a lot of that actually comes from actual lost history, albeit ancient history that's so far in the past that it's barely even a myth anymore. But still, it's still a real thing that actually happened. My cousin, he fought in Iraq. He fought in Afghanistan. And there's he was telling me a bunch of these stories about soldiers who allegedly encountered giants out in the hills in Afghanistan. And there's tons of legends of giants out in the hills today in Afghanistan, of giants that still live out there. But, of course, sworn a secret that people aren't really allowed to talk about it. Again, you don't have to believe it. It's not, I don't need you to believe it. That's not even really what the show is about. I wanted to show you that there is, for every symbol, there's three things, and I wanted to at least point out the first one, which is the thing you can point to in the physical universe about giants. That's really all this section is about. Okay? All right. Got to adjust. Ugh. Forgive me. Okay, so the second one. So actually what we're going to do is we're going to talk about the macrocosm version of the frost giants next. Because it's just easier to do it that way. So the frost giants represent a particular law. And this law is, I'm not even sure if it even has a specific name, but it's creation out of chaos, essentially is what it is. I think maybe it's called chaos theory. I don't know. But basically what it means is out of chaos, new things come into being. So there's the thing. English is a crappy language. It just is. English is a really crappy language. And the thing to keep in mind is that the original meanings, the way that these original things were understood, have been largely lost. The original meanings of chaos has been fairly lost. Chaos was a god. The god Chaos. He was an actual god. He's along the same lines as like Saturn. Saturn has always been a very major player in our world, even today. Still a very major player on the world stage. So not all gods have left. I should say, not all the gods have left. There are certainly a couple of them that are still here, and we see their effects to extreme amounts in our lives. And Saturn is one of those. But Chaos was a god. He was a very specific god. And so, on some level, a god always represents a function of the universe. It represents law. So, right off the bat, we know that chaos doesn't necessarily mean that everything is on fire and destruction is everywhere and there's anarchy and people are blowing each other up in the streets. No, chaos doesn't mean disorder. And that's a really strange thing to say, because a lot of people, because that's the way the word is used today. But it's not the original meaning, and it's not the way that it is used in the mystery schools. Chaos doesn't mean disorder. In fact, there's actually two accompanying words. You have chaos on one side, and you have cosmos on the other. And so the way to understand chaos is like this. Sorry, it's hot. Is like this. So, cosmos represents the order that comes from inside, say, like a gated community, a gated city. It's safe in there. Bad things can't come in. Marauders can't come in. You're safe. You can go to the store and buy the things you need, and everything's. It's order, right? It's order. Things are functional, and things just work the way they're supposed to. But if you don't leave, you will die. It's the truth. If no one leaves the gated community and goes out into chaos, the land of the frost giants, you'll die. It's the place outside of the gated community. That's where you grow your crops. That's where you raise your cattle. That's where you hunt for food. That's where, especially if you're dealing with an ancient village, you have to leave in order to find a wife. You have to leave in order to find inspiration. The concept of chaos is a requirement for the acquisition of something new. Period. It's just the way it is. Right? You have to go out into chaos to get anything new into life. This is why in every story, without exception, every time the gods encounter a frost giant, they always come back with something they did not have before. It's a law. It's talking. This is when you realize that the myths are actually the runes. The myths are actually wisdom, are actually the wisdom that were given to us from the gods. They don't write science in the same way we write science down. We write science down in scientific journals. They wrote science down in stories. So, what are they trying to tell us? They're trying to say an encounter with frost giants, even though it is terrible, it always produces something good. Something always comes out of it. So, like I grew up in the mountains of Eastern Oregon, and the town I grew up in only had 200 people in it, and half those people, at least a quarter of them, were hunters that came in from Portland. I live in Eastern Oregon. I live in Western Oregon now, but at that time I lived in Eastern Oregon, and people would come in from Portland to go hunting. So I would say probably a good 150 of those, maybe 125, were actually were year-round residents. Everyone else came in seasonally, or had like a cabin or something in town. And if you're like me and you grew up in the woods, you even though that the the mountains are considered chaos, right? The mountains are scary. There's wild animals out there. There's a tremendous amount of order that is in that chaos. Chaos isn't just fire and brimstone. It's a certain... There's a nuance to it. There's like a certain mystery that is contained within it. It's the... like you could drown in the ocean, but the ocean isn't chaotic. It is just... it's order. It's law. But it's a different kind of law. It's a different kind of order than that then exists inside the walls of the city. So, so here's the thing. Don't underestimate the precious gift that is struggle. It's a gift. It's a very precious gift. Because struggle gives you something that nothing else in the universe can. Look at your life right now. Right? Look at the world we live in. Would you say it's chaotic? Of course you would say it's chaotic. Right? There's all kinds of crazy stuff that's going on. Would you say there's order, though, to it? Absolutely. The two things aren't mutually exclusive. Chaos isn't the lack of order. Chaos is struggle. Chaos is the thing that that lets you grow and get new things. So it's like standing against a stream. You're trying to push against that stream. When you're trying to push, it'll run you over. Especially if it's like a river or something. You try and push against that river, it'll just knock you over. Understanding law, understanding the law of chaos, understanding what the frost giants are there to represent, gives you the ability to harness that and turn it into a principle of creation rather than a force that is just going to eat you up and dash you against the rocks. And usually that's what actually happens with people. People, they try and stand against the current and they get dashed against the rocks and they lay there and say, why do bad things keep happening to me? Why do I keep getting hit around? Why am I suffering? It's because you're butting up against laws that you're ignorant of. And if you know the law, you could use the law to your benefit. I mean, you hear this all the time. There's a Guy Raz, the guy who does the TED Radio Hour on NPR. He has this other show called How I Built That. And he interviews tons of people who were multimillionaires and billionaires who started major companies. And one of the things you hear almost in every episode, without exception, is people talking about how grateful they are for having failed. You know, they'll say like, you know, failing at this was the very best thing that ever happened to me. You know, struggling for this was the very best thing that ever happened to me because it gave me these things in order to be able to make something of it, of this, you know, of my life. It's a precious gift. And people look at it like it's this negative thing. Struggle is incredibly important in our lives. So we're going to shift gears a little bit. Now we're going to talk about the microcosm, or the minor arcana of the frost giants. So the frost giants. Remember that our minds are like a house. We're consciousness that moves around inside the house. And we're not always conscious of everything that's in our mind. But we could discover new things that are in there. There's other things that live inside the house. And there's other things that could talk inside the windows. Right? I'm in my house right now. And if I'm listening, I can hear someone outside with a dog. I can hear someone yelling at me from the sidewalk if they were so inclined. Um, you know, things can still get in, and so you are not the only person who has access to that house. There's a lot of things that have access to that house, and among those are the frost giants. The Christians, it's not. This isn't really a perfect comparison, but the Christians would call them the demons, right? The little things that chat in your ear. So we kind of go back to that chaos and cosmos thing we were just talking about a second ago, but on a smaller scale. So in the Odinic mysteries, the mind right here is Asgard, and the skull is essentially the wall that surrounds Asgard. This is the land of the gods, right? This is the seat of this is the throne room where the god sits, where you sit, essentially. And the frost giants are always butting up against the walls and trying to get in. And so the and so how do I put it? So, and this is pretty this idea is pretty common, with this being the temple of God. So in Masonic tradition, this is called the Temple of Solomon. Solomon that Hiram Abiff built, the mind. The Masons have a 33 degrees in their system. You have 33 degrees in your spinal column. Jesus died when he was 33 years old. So, and Jesus, it said that Jesus dies at the crossing. Jesus dies on the cross. Jesus dies on the tree. Huh. I think my camera just froze. Or was I? Okay, yeah, so the Masons have 33 degrees in their system. The human body has 33 vertebrae. Jesus, it is said, dies on a tree at the crossing at the age of 33. All right. In every mystery scroll tradition, almost everywhere, the human is always symbolized as a tree. Almost always. It's not always the case, but I would say like 90% of the time, the human body is represented as a tree. The tree of life, the tree of good and evil. Jesus dies on a tree. The Odinic Mysteries has Yggdrasil, the world tree. The Mayan have a world tree. It just goes on and on and on and on and on and on. So the right up here at the very top of the tree, in the Garden of Eden, the serpent is on the tree. All of that pretty much represents the spinal column. Right up the back of the spinal column. Right up here at the top, at the place of the crossing, is a gateway right there, and that is where the Abdullah sits, or the lizard brain. It's the place of the base consciousness. So when Jesus dies on the tree, when Jesus dies at the crossing, he dies at the place where the mind hits the lower consciousness that's sitting on top of the spinal column, right up there at the very crown of that. And those are always called the gates. The gates. And so there's several major myths that the Norse have concerning the walls. There's a lot of times, how do I even put it? There's a lot of myths that ultimately end up with the frost giants trying to get in through the walls and can't. And that's because the walls of Asgard represent the mind. Jesus, it said, like you said, dies at the place of the skull of Golgotha, and that's when he descends into the underworld. And so, sorry, I'm kind of struggling with this a little bit. There's just a lot of moving parts, and I want to make sure I want to make sure that I'm explaining this in a way that makes sense. So the frost giants. Let's just simplify this up. The frost giants represent that little voice, essentially, that's sitting there and telling you you're crap. The thing that gets people in trouble is the assumption that everything you hear in your head comes from you. And that's why people get so devastated when they have like some sort of terrible thought, right? They have like a thought suddenly that pops in their head about drowning their child or killing their spouse or jumping off a bridge, or, you know, they just have these horrible thoughts that just pop into their head for some reason, and then all these doubts that come in, and suddenly they think they're worthless. These thoughts that make them feel like they're nothing, and no one cares about them, and the world would be better if they're gone, and all that. That's all the frost giants. On a mental level, that is the frost giants trying to assault the holy city, the place of the gods, the seat of power. That is the place where all of that is happening. They're assaulting the gates. The frost giants, the base consciousness right here, is assaulting the gates of the underworld. Is assaulting the gates of the heavens. And, you know, that's why, like in Revelation, when you have to, like I said, you have to read it in three different ways if you're going to read any of these prophecies, because they not only represent physical phenomenon and a spiritual phenomenon, but they represent mental phenomenon as well. And if you're familiar with Jacob Israel's channel, he talks a lot about the mental phenomenon that happens with these, with some of these prophecies, when the false spirit takes up residence in the mind and declares itself to be God. Right? It's that's when the frost giant takes over and says, "I am God now. There's no one here but me." That is the abomination of desolation, right? And so if you realize that you're not the only person who has access to your mind, and you realize that when you start hearing those things, it's not you. It's not necessarily coming from you. It's something else that is assaulting the gates of the heavens, so to speak. And I'm sorry, I got all that was kind of confusing in the middle. But I was trying to paint a picture. I was trying to explain the parallels between what is shown in the mythology and what the realities are when it comes to the mind, because those things are they're tricky. When in modern times we write about science differently, we write about mental stuff differently than they did back then. Back then, partly because of the mysteries and partly because of culture, important truths were told in story form, and it was assumed that you understood them. But now, thousands of years later, we look at these stories and we just think they're just stories. They're fun little stories, and people want to believe them in a very literal way. They want to say Jesus literally did this, and in the book of Revelation there will literally be a stone that falls from the sky and obliterates the earth. There will be a literal person who's an antichrist. He'll sit upon a literal throne inside a literal temple and declare himself a literal God. Instead of realizing that these stories are though might actually happen in an externalized sense, more importantly, they happen in a personal sense. That's something that happens here. It's the fall into the underworld before something new gets to come out of it. But that's part of the process, though. You know, accepting the frost giants as a function of the universe makes you a stronger, better person. We, like I said a second ago, don't underestimate the importance of struggle. It's a precious gift. It's a unique gift. The ancient Egyptians believed that being born in a human body is the rarest thing in the universe. That there was nothing more sacred in the universe than being born in a human body. That coming here was the most sacred, most honored, most precious thing that could happen to a spirit. Which is why the penalties for wasting your opportunity while you're here was so great. It was immense penalties. And I kind of fall in a belief with that. I believe that it is extremely rare to be here. And understanding the role of struggle, understanding what chaos is and how it is used and why it is here is an important part of setting yourself free. Because you no longer are a victim to your circumstances. If you see your time here as a job interview, as a time of testing, then things are much more manageable. Then when you lose your job, or you're poor, or you're struggling with school, or your boss is a dick, or your friend Kathy won't shut up about her problems, or it doesn't matter. Just whatever it is that you're struggling with. Those are easier to take in stride when you realize that this is just another test. This is just something that's forcing me to struggle, that will ultimately set me free and make it so that I'm a better spiritual being in the long run. Because remember, whenever you encounter a frost giant, if you do it right, you always come back with something better than when you first encountered it. When you leave Earth, whether it's in this lifetime or 1,000 lifetimes from now, you will leave this place with something you did not have when you came. And I mean that. And really take a minute and let that sink in. When you leave Earth, whenever that is, now or 1,000 lifetimes from now, you'll leave here, the land of the frost giants. You'll leave here with something you did not have when you came. Something special and something very unique and extraordinarily precious that no one else gets to have. But you get to have that. You do. And that's what's important. So, I'm sorry that this video was a little confusing. Maybe it's not as confusing as I made it sound, or I think it is. But it's important. Those things are important to talk about. And I like the humanity of struggling on camera and trying to get out some of these complex things, because it's important. I feel like it makes things more relatable. Anyway, well, I love you guys. I'm sorry if the audio wasn't all that great. Hopefully next time it won't be so darn hot that I could sit at my desk again, which I like to do. And all right. Well, I love you, and have a good time. Bye-bye. Go ahead and say it.
Oh, please subscribe.
Everyone, please subscribe.
Please subscribe.
Please subscribe.
Please subscribe.
Nice try. Good job.
Yeah.